Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to take a look at the overall image quality and give you a verdict on the new Tamron 10-24mm f3.5 to 4.5 VC HLD wide-angle lens. Now, as we jump in and we take a look here today, there are a few things that I want to break down as a part of this. One thing that I do want to mention is that this is an APS-C specific lens, so for crop sensor camera bodies. Now, that being said, because it does, in the case of a Canon, for example, it uses an EF rather than EFS mount, you can actually technically mount it on a full frame camera. However, it doesn't cover the full frame image circle until about 13.5 millimeters, somewhere roughly in there. So from about, to be safe, let's say from 14 millimeters to 24 millimeters, it does cover the full frame image circle. So, that gives you some options. For example, I've already used it some on the 5D Mark IV for shooting video. And because there's already a crop factor there for shooting 4K video, which means that with that about 1.7 times crop factor, you have a full frame equivalent 17 millimeters of angle of view, which means, of course, that already you're past wherever there would be vignette, and so the full frame, in this case, the full frame image circle is already covered, even at 10 millimeters. And so anyway, there are some applications for it there, but really this is designed for crop sensor bodies, and so that's what we're going to focus on here. So that being said, I do find it a little bit hard because I am a almost exclusively full frame shooter, and I'm used to reviewing full frame equivalent lenses and shooting on full frame bodies. And so I find it a little bit hard sometimes when doing crop sensor reviews to kind of divorce the actual performance of the lens from the limitations of APS-C. And I find that particularly when shooting landscapes, that APS-C is not my favorite in the sense that I find that the pixels are just a little bit rougher and the graduation of colors is not quite as smooth, handling of light not quite as smooth, and so I do prefer full frame image quality. But to kind of equalize things, to give a point of comparison, I decided to use the actual kind of full frame equivalent of this lens from Tamron, the Big Brother, which as you can see, it's a much larger lens. It's more than twice as much in terms of money. It has some other limitations that come with it, but it is a similar type wide angle, stabilized, lens. Now, the difference being, of course, is that the full frame equivalent has a maximum aperture of f2.8 throughout the whole focal range, while this is a variable aperture zoom lens, f3.5 to f4.5. But by mounting them both on a crop sensor 80D body, I was able to kind of get a decent point of comparison for just reviewing overall image quality and sharpness. And so we're going to jump in and we're going to look at the overall image quality together, at the resolution, how it handles flare, vignette, all of those things. And so let's take a look. All right, we're going to start by looking at the image quality here at 10 millimeters, and since there really isn't a way to compare this to the 15 to 30, I'm just going to take a look here. This is wide open f3.5, and so as you can see, even from wide open, there really is a pretty good amount of detail across the frame. You can see a little bit of chromatic aberration here along these high contrast areas on the left side of the frame. And we'll take a look over on the right. You can see some of the same here. But in terms of overall sharpness, really there's a lot of information that's there. 10 millimeters f3.5. Now you can see that when we stop down to f4, that there's definitely some difference in vignette here as I kind of toggle back and forth. And so that certainly makes a difference overall. Let's check out the chromatic aberration. And we'll see that it really looks pretty much the same, and I think that's because we're dealing with some lateral chromatic aberration here that is towards the edge of the frame, and it's not necessarily helped by stopping down. Looking again towards the center of the frame, you can see once again we've got a good amount of detail overall. So as we compare side by side f3.5 and f5.6, while there is obviously a very significant difference in the overall vignette, if we look towards the actual center of the frame here and resolution, while you're going to see just a hair more texture information, I would say that overall they're pretty close. And so even at f3.5, you're getting a significant amount of resolution out of the lens. Okay, so now in our comparison, the Tamron 15-30 is on the left side. So first, I'm just going to compare in this case, at 15 millimeters, wide open is f4 for the 10-24, and obviously it's 2.8 throughout the range. But let's just take a look at how these shape up here by comparison. You can see a similar quality in that both of them have that lateral chromatic aberration, although it's a little bit more pronounced on the full frame lens here. And also, of course, we're seeing a little bit more texture information if we look towards the right side here. I wouldn't say that it's as true on the right side. I like the contrast here. However, both of them are showing some lateral chromatic aberration there towards the edges. Now, our focus point is really somewhere around this pillar area here. And so comparing them side by side, I would say they are close, but maybe a slight edge to the 10-24 with them both wide open, although it's not always true. Let's just say that they are very close at this point, and so you're getting pretty similar image quality. Now, if we stop the 15-30 down to f4 here, you're going to see a pretty significant difference in the amount of vignette in the image. If we look towards this area here, you know, pretty much a similar result. There's just more texture that's showing up on this. And our main focus area, once again, you know, it's pretty close, although I give the contrast edge now to the 15 millimeter, or excuse me, to the 15-30. You can see that here, if we look towards this area here, just a little bit more resolution overall. But the fact that the 10-24 is, you know, staying pretty close is impressive. Now with both of them at f5.6, vignette, of course, is basically non-existent on both of them. You know, there's still a little bit of that lateral CA evident here, although it's not very pronounced on either lens, and it's certainly not going to ruin the image. In terms of looking at these sharpness-wise, I don't really see a whole lot to distinguish them overall. They are pretty close. I would give a contrast edge to the full frame lens, but I would say really, all things considered, they're delivering pretty similar image quality. Now at 20 millimeters, the maximum aperture has shifted to f4.5 for the 10-24. Of course, still f2.8 here. So a quick look here shows that obviously there's less vignette for the full frame lens, but you can also definitely see more of that lateral chromatic aberration than you can. It seems to be a little bit better on the 10-24 at this point. If we look at our overall sharpness here, results are pretty similar. Again, I think there is a little bit more, there's more micro contrast on the full frame 15-30, and it shows up just here. There's a kind of a hint of haze that's not there with the full frame lens. If we put them both at f5.6, obviously still less CA here for the 10-24 millimeter because of the lateral chromatic aberration there. If we look at our kind of sharpness areas here, you know, I think that the full frame is slightly better contrast, you know, and a little less kind of, there's a bit of a haze on the texture here, lower contrast, and definitely it looks better on the full frame lens. But once again, overall, the image quality is not massively different. Now at 24 millimeters, I've got it at f4 versus f4.5 here, and we will see here in the edges that once again there is definitely more of the lateral chromatic aberration. So that's an advantage for the 10-24, is that it has a bit less overall chromatic aberration. In terms of the overall sharpness here, once again it's close, but with the edge going to the full frame 10-24, and that becomes more apparent, and I really find in this area where the detail rendering is just crisper overall on the full frame lens. Now here at 24 millimeters, which of course is the end of the focal range for the 10 to 24, while on the full frame lens it's still got another 6 millimeters to go. But overall here, if we look in this extreme corner, you can definitely give a slight advantage to the 10 to 24, both of them at f5.6. If we look in this area here, it's pretty close overall. Look at a few other areas here, and we can see that they're at f5.6. They're hanging pretty close. If we look back to this area though, we see once again that there is an advantage for the full frame lens in the center of the frame. However, let's go out to this edge of the frame here, and really there's not a lot to distinguish the two out towards the edge. It's a little bit closer a comparison there. All right, here are just some kind of architectural type shots. This is 10 millimeters f5.6, and so you can see a nice looking image overall globally in terms of the actual details throughout. This is good, not spectacular. There's a bit of chromatic aberration showing here. But overall the image looks good, and I think holds up well in comparison to any of the actual competitors to this lens. Now here is at night. This is in Niagara Falls, and so this is more about the overall autofocus accuracy. Image looks good here, and I was focusing on this sign here, and although it's higher ISO, you can see that the autofocus is very accurate and has given me a nice and crisp detailed result despite the higher ISO setting. Now, a quick look at overall distortion here, and so kind of the main area where I'm seeing a bit of a bulge is along this line right here. It's not severe, but there is a bit of a bulge taking place. In terms of the actual brick pattern, it really looks pretty good. This is at 10 millimeters here, and so there is a bit of barrel distortion there, but it's not really particularly pronounced, and so I've seen much worse. But if you look here towards the center of the frame, there's definitely nothing that is a strong kind of like mustache pattern or some kind of weird distortion that's hard to correct for. So here at 20 millimeters, we see that overall our distortion is really quite good. Still a little bit of barrel distortion that you can see, but not bad overall. And then if we move out to 24 millimeters, you can see there's just a slight bit of a pin cushion. You can see towards the edges here, but overall distortion is fairly well controlled. Now, this is just to give you a sense of a real-world image, and this is at Le Chateau Montebello in Quebec. And so here I set this up on a tripod. It's a longer exposure, and so I'm kind of blurring out the people's faces for the kind of shot I was doing here. But you can see overall that the lines, while not perfect, they're pretty clean overall. And so while this wouldn't be my top choice for architectural work, it does the job in a pinch. And so gives you an idea of the overall look. And if you just want to look at the overall sharpness here, gives you an idea that throughout this frame there's a good amount of detail, right out to the edges. I think that more than anything, this lens doesn't blow me away with its micro contrast, but in terms of overall resolution, it's really quite good. Now, in terms of the overall flare resistance, this is one area where I think that the lens has an advantage over the full frame 15 to 30. Okay, so here we see a pretty nice sun star here, just a little bit of prismatic haze, but obviously contrast is held up quite well. I've got a small ghosting effect here, and that was pretty consistent with what I saw, just a little bit of ghosting, but overall flare resistance is really quite good. This was shot at night in Niagara Falls. This is a handheld image at 1/8 of a second, and so it goes to show you that, obviously detail is crisp here. The VC does really good on this lens. It's very unobtrusive. It doesn't get in the way. It's not obvious at all, but it allows you to really handhold fairly ridiculous shots. Here's another one at 1/8 of a second, and so you can see here that detail is perfectly crisp. There's some noise here because of a higher ISO setting. But overall, there's definitely no motion blur that's a part of the image, and so the VC is doing a great job. This is pretty close to out of camera, and so it shows you that it's pretty cool what you can do in the right kind of situation. This also gives us a little bit of a look at the bokeh here. There is mist on the lens, and it does have nice Nice weather sealing, which is great at this price point, and so I've been right near the falls, so lots of mist around. But I used it to my advantage here to produce some bokeh highlights. So it just gives you a little bit of a look at the bokeh circle. Pretty clean. You can see some of an inner line here, but overall it looks fairly decent. Not that this is really going to be a bokeh kind of lens for you. Now, unfortunately, the sky has not cooperated me for shooting stars to test chroma, but I did set up a test using a laser pointer, and then I just combined various images in Photoshop so we could take a look across the frame. So towards the center, star points, we'll call them that, are nice and crisp overall. As we move towards the edge of the frame, you can see just a little bit of a tail and wing starting to grow, and so here at the top, and then over in this left corner. So just expect out towards the edges you're going to see a bit of chroma, but not the worst performance that I've seen. I think that you can produce a credible image shooting the night sky. I think that the 15-30 is a little bit better in this regard, but overall this isn't the worst performance I've seen either. So as you can see, really in a lot of ways, this far less expensive lens holds up fairly well compared to the full frame equivalent. And this Tamron 15-30 f2.8, it really has held up well against all of the new challengers, wide-angle challengers that I've reviewed in the past few years, since I've owned it and can kind of use it as a benchmark. And so saying that means that I find that this lens is really performing quite well. And as you can see, it's very usable, even wide open, and you get some sharpness improvement with it. It's stopped down, and I really find around f5.6 to f8 to be a sweet spot for the overall image performance. Now, it actually even has a few advantages compared to the big brother in that, number one, it can use traditional screw-on filters, which is a huge thing, and a very common 77mm filter size. Also, because it doesn't have that bulbous front element, it is better in terms of its flare resistant, and it doesn't capture stray light and flare quite as much as what the 15-30 does. There is some vignette at wide open, but it's not terrible. And so as you can see, there is of course more distortion towards the wide end, which largely corrects as you zoom in overall. Beyond that, it actually does a better job in most situations of handling chromatic aberration. In the case of the 15-30, it has some lateral chromatic aberration that isn't going to be really solved by stopping the lens down. And so overall, this does a little bit better on that. Color rendition is good, and so really optically, it does quite well. And so it makes it quite a compelling option in that it has a very effective image stabilizer and really does a very effective job, which of course makes it also an intriguing option for use with video because of that very effective image stabilizer. And so, it has some things that very few lenses at this price point and in this class do. It has the moisture and weather resistance, which is a huge thing if you're going to be shooting outside and particularly shooting near water. I shot this right by Niagara Falls. I got lots of water on it. I've gone out cross-country skiing with it, and so carried it in snow and some kind of wet sleet. And it's operated fine and kept up with that. So that's certainly a nice thing. And having that and having the image stabilizer is a pretty great asset. So in the US market, this lens comes in at $499, which means that really it's very competitive, and it's going to be, while it costs more than, say, the Canon 10-18 STM lens, of course it has a bigger zoom range overall, it has a better build, and that HLD provides a better autofocus. The autofocus is very accurate, it's fast, and it works very well in video capture as well. And so I think that overall the HLD focus motor is pretty fantastic. Just a slight bit more noise during video AF servo than the STM lens. But overall, it's very quiet, definitely compared to, USM or USD type lenses during video capture. And so I think that Tamron has a winning technology there on their hands for that. So overall, I think this is an attractive lens. If you're an APS shooter and you're looking for a decent wide angle option, I see no reason why this shouldn't be very high on your list. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the linkage down below or the description there, you will find a linkage to my full written review with a lot of image samples as a part of that. There's also linkage to an image gallery with a whole lot of photos included there you'll enjoy looking at. And of course, you can sign up for my newsletter or follow me on social media. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.